You fought Amaris. Now fight boredom and depression. Yeah! Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, I'd like to thank everybody for giving me extra details on stuff that Tex might not have been able to get into within the video. It's always super fun to go into the comments and read the extra bits of lore there. And secondly, I'd also like to apologize for the YouTube version of this video kind of being cut down in weird and awkward places. It's usually just epidemic sound trying to claim certain pieces of music that Tex uses, and for the most part I usually win those disputes, but last time it didn't really work out, so yeah, the video ended up chopped up pretty awkwardly. One of you guys suggested that I should probably contact Tex about it, and him and his team would probably be able to help me with that, but I'm just one dude who's trying to learn about BattleTech from his videos. I don't really want to go over there and bother him. I'm sure he's a very busy individual, so I'll try to do the best that I can on my end and having to deal with the whole YouTube copyright system. Been dealing with that for 4 years now, and it doesn't get any easier. I really don't like to self-promote myself in my own videos, but in this case, I guess it's kind of warranted. If you guys really want to see like the full reaction without any potential cuts that I have to do for YouTube, we do have a Patreon. Lowest tier is only $1, and no matter what tier that you choose, you'll get access to every single video of ours, ad-free as well, so if that's your preferred viewing experience, you can go down to the link in the description. And I believe that's everything I need to address in this intro. I think we can just move on to learning more about what the clans did and how it ended up this way.
General Alexander Kerensky announced to the fleet that they had finally reached their destination, that the long journey was over, and that the time to build was at hand.
Did he know this is where he wants to go?
The colonization of what would become the Pentagon Cluster began in earnest. While untamed and by Inner-Sphere standards marginal worlds at best, the Pentagon Cluster was ideal for colonization and exploitation for many reasons. The worlds were near perfect distance from each other for combined defense, trade, and resource sharing. As an added strategic bonus,
man, it sounds so good when you put it like that. We have multiple different worlds that are pretty close to each other, so when time comes, we can all work together to help defend each other and share resources. And then we ended up becoming the clans and warring with each other, and how? Come on, man. We kind of got rid of the mutiny on the way here already, but I suppose the people that were involved there are still kind of at large. The more and more we learn about it, the more this hurts, because I can see the potential here. I'm sure Kerensky saw the potential here. And yet, human nature.
They were shrouded from the inner sphere by the Caliban Nebula, located just a few jumps away. Not that the inner sphere was intent on sending ships out this far to search.
They didn't have resources
At
too.
1,300 light years from Terra, they were now far beyond where any man had gone before. And with colonization achieved, with renewed purpose, and with the hope of a new beginning, the peace they had sought for so very long finally looked possible. For nearly a decade, everything went well enough. From 2786 to 2794, there was a time of explosive development, of rapid expansion, and for many, finally, opportunities for healing.
Man, those 10 years probably were so damn good. Well, I mean, obviously the journey here was tough and many perished along the way, and I'm sure for many it was very difficult to reintegrate into society or try to form a new society here on these worlds. Like, I know during the pandemic, or rather after the pandemic, with this whole talk of a new normal and whatnot, and so many people being distressed that they couldn't go out and do the same things that they did before and whatnot, a lot of people were already up in arms about that, but this is like way more severe than just go outside, wear a mask. So I couldn't possibly imagine what it would feel like to be in their position. Such a unique position too, because I've never seen something like this in another sci-fi story before. Then again, I probably just haven't experienced enough sci-fi stories.
General Alexander Kerensky oversaw the creation of Star League in Exile, a provisional government designed to keep the dream alive, even if 1,300 light-years coreward of the inner sphere.
Yeah,
it was a time
need some form
of
of
such
governance.
prosperity. that colonization efforts were soon enough directed to other worlds, namely the nearby stars of what was soon called the Kerensky Cluster. But it was not long before such prosperity would be challenged.
Of course. Damn. It's kind of unfortunate though. If only it went on a little bit longer, I could have gone to the intermission part. Oh yeah, shit's insane. I can only imagine. Hell yeah. Yep, that sounds about right. I too have been offered certain sponsorships on my videos for a lot of shitty mobile games and just products that are very obviously scams. And some of these companies even just use like AI to email you. So it's kind of become a meme among my regulars and my community where they kind of refer to me as Mr. The because the AI just kind of like takes the first word in your name on your YouTube account and refers to you as that. So I often get emails titled to me as, hello, Mr. The. We really love your videos, so-and-so. Would you like to promote this product for $500? No. Hopefully someday we can get some actually legit sponsorships. But as for now, and for most YouTubers, it'd be like that. Oh, and kind of off topic, but if you're wondering what you're supposed to refer to me as, my name is Zero, spelled with an X because I'm cool and edgy like that. The legit Weebs is the channel name, but that's more so the name of our group as a whole. I can very easily tell a real fan from a fake fan apart whenever somebody refers to me as Mr. Weebs or refers to me as Zero, so there you go.
Please, Captain, whatever you do, if you kill me, at least don't tell Stella. I don't want her to be at my funeral.
He stares at him, then he takes a long pull on a cigar, and he punches him like 12 times in the face.
Interesting. Well, I guess there's a tabletop for everything, yeah. Playing D&D with my friends has been so much fun. We do it every Sunday. Well, actually, I'm recording this on Sunday, so later today. Hey. Good to know.
They want to crush a country that
Fuck you.
doesn't exist.
What?
Fred, please.
Belgium doesn't even exist.
Maintain some decorum, Fred, please.
But why? I see. Whoa. I shouldn't have to ask. Of course you would. Good for Mike. I'm terrified too. What even is that? What? How did you get this idea? Why? Because it's glorious, I guess? Hey, you know, sometimes you just gotta mess around and have fun. We're a bit past that point earlier, but with Tex only taking like 2 vacations in the year and having to be forced to do them, actually so real. Because as a YouTuber, it really feels like when you're not uploading, you're just not actually doing anything. You're not doing anything worthwhile. And the algorithm, as well as the YouTube dashboard, really kind of promotes you into that sort of mindset. Because there's always that feeling of, if you don't upload, then your channel is just gonna die. And for many people, that is actually the case. So really, it's just a matter of doing as much work as possible to get on the horse, and staying on that horse for as long as possible, until you're happy with where you ended up. But obviously, that's not very healthy. And for many people, we see this kind of job as like a way to escape the usual 9 to 5, but then it turns out that you end up working more than the usual 9 to 5. But I guess it's doing something that you enjoy, so there's that trade-off. If any of you guys watching this video, though, ever want to get into YouTube, start it as a hobby and also have a very clear work-life schedule behind it. Otherwise, you're gonna end up facing burnout like so many of the OG YouTubers have. I don't really know what I do with them, if I'm being honest. Pink bikini. Rates are reasonable. Cool, I'll have to check that out. I've been meaning to, like, get some intro music for the streams. Hey, you follow New Vegas? Homeworld, hell yeah. The first Homeworld was goated. Learned about it through Mandalore's video. We don't talk about Homeworld 3. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Learned about that, I think like a few weeks ago? It was the first time I started learning about it. Did some videos about all the different fighters I'm designing for, as well as Bumbles. Okay, I'm sorry guys. I know I'm gonna get crucified for this, but I can't lie to you guys. I have not seen a single episode of Star Trek before. I don't know why. Maybe it was because it was kind of before my time. And honestly, the whole reason why I don't know so much about so many things when it comes to like video games and pop culture and whatnot was because I spent the majority of my life just playing sports. I was super focused on that, and there wasn't really a whole lot of time to do anything else or see all the cool stuff that all the cool kids got to learn about. So, but hey, it's been super fun learning about them now. Getting to share my experiences too here on this channel. Glad to be here learning about BattleTech and maybe in the future about Star Trek? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where my interests take me. Discovery, is that like a bad season of Star Trek? I don't know. I didn't know what BattleTech was either until I believe I got a suggestion about it in the comments. Actually, no. I remember now. That was, the first time I actually learned about Warhammer 40k. A lot of Warhammer fans were also BattleTech fans, and they suggested I check out Tex. That's insane. I can't do that. There's so much stuff I don't want to see in the comments, not gonna lie sometimes. I do read the lore ones though. The word senpai explained to him. Yeah, if you're not Asian, that whole concept is a little bit abstract. I've heard of Johnny Quest before. I've never seen it. Don't even know what it is. Just heard the name. RIP. I believe that's the company name? I don't know, there's so many things I don't know. This wasn't my generation. Although I wasn't even in my own generation either, so I guess I'm kind of in limbo. Do recognize some of these names though. It was a bit weird that I enjoyed listening to like old English music as opposed to all the peeps here in Thailand don't really listen to that stuff.
After thoroughly surveying the worlds and making as certain as possible they were suitable for permanent colonization, the SLDF fleet began to rapidly shift from survival in space to a dedicated colonization effort. It was a fundamental change in mission parameters, so unused equipment, weapons, and warships were placed into storage or mothballed.
Actually, I just realized this whole plot of going out into deep space to find a new home to colonize is basically just Homeworld, isn't it? I mean, Homeworld had a very clear goal to it with a prophecy and whatnot, but a lot of the story beats follow a similar trajectory. And yeah, I loved Homeworld stories, so there's really no surprise why I'm enjoying this video so much.
Balls for later use if necessary. Few thought they'd need to touch a weapon in the near future, and for some, the conversion from a military life to a civilian one wasn't exactly a smooth transition.
Nigh impossible.
The SLDF found themselves in a case of turning swords into plowshares, and much formerly military equipment was immediately pressed into service in the name of survival, or cannibalized for parts to keep people alive. However, there was the ever-present issue of manpower. After all, a colony in a delicate balance of survival doesn't need 100 divisions of fighting men and women. Colonies need civilian infrastructure. They were in need of hard work,
to grow.
Sweat, and determination focused on making a go at it. And so a fundamental change in the order of things was absolutely necessary for Starleague in Exile to survive at all. Starleague in Exile began to force the majority of the SLDF to test out and become civilians. The controlled demobilization required every member of the SLDF test or be forced out. Only the best of the best would stay in uniform, and the rest...
You fought a Maris. Now fight boredom and depression. Yeah! Oh, I'd rather go and fight a Maris, please. Also, turn in your rifle and pick up a hoe is hilarious. I hope that somewhere out there that's actually a slogan.
Would become the genesis of a new civilian working class. 75% of the SLDF tested out, from the lowest ranking soldier to the highest ranking general. Only those of extraordinary aptitude, skill, and health were allowed to stay in uniform. The now unneeded vast arsenals of weaponry were placed into stockpiles called Brian caches, paying homage to Starleague's own Castles Brian. Warships were placed into reserve fleets or mothballed around planetary bodies in the event they'd ever be needed in the future. Parts of the fleet lived on, and many of the demobilized SLDF served in a newly established group called the Explorers Corps, who began to chart nearby star systems for habitable planets and exploitable resources. While the demobilizations were necessary for survival, it seems in retrospect optimistic, or at the very least hopeful, to believe for such a massive change overnight to succeed. Many of these brave men and women had seen decades of horrific combat, all of them deeply bearing the scars of their campaigns in some way or another, with most unable to forget the horrors of collapsed worlds and burning cities, turning most of them into civilians. Forcing them to change their lifestyle overnight was a gamble. While some adapted well enough, many had long ago forgotten how to be civilians, or, in some cases, even civil people.
Oh yeah. How I imagine this is something similar to Rambo First Blood. That movie portrayed this sort of transition and the PTSD from war and how it can affect a person. And I think it portrayed that beautifully in a way that I think the later Rambo movies kind of forgot about. Not gonna lie. But I don't know, it's just my opinion. But I kind of use that movie as my frame of reference for when I'm trying to understand what these soldiers are going through.
Who had suffered through campaign after campaign hardly felt rewarded for being told to now farm and like it. A new life forced upon them, and then with a complete lack of basic amenities, let alone any form of luxury, set the stage for future discontent. Man. For a time, though,
you fought so hard
the
for this.
SLDF took to their new lives without much complaint. It was, after all, a welcome reprieve from years of cramped starship living, wandering the cosmos aimlessly, and the horrors of their now distant past. Kerensky closed the book on the past as best he could by broadcasting toward the inner sphere a final message. The Voice of Kerensky broadcast we covered in the Ameris Civil War lecture series, but it is absolutely worth bringing up again for historical reference as a companion to the Hidden Hope doctrine. The Voice of Kerensky message was one of hope, conveying that perhaps one day the inner sphere would not be a place of turmoil, and that future generations may learn to live among each other in peace. Broadcast September the 9th, 2786, the Voice of Kerensky message would take at least 1,000 years to reach the inner sphere on broadband carrier waves. It was a message of hope, but prudent enough to be sent the slowest means possible. It would be time enough for people to grow up, time enough for people to find a better way.
If only.
Theory, anyways. By strange coincidence, that very message would only be heard 260 short years later, but that's a whole nother story. For a short time, though, there was indeed peace and prosperity for Starleague in exile. Cities were built, houses became homes, people farmed, started families, and did their best to forget their troubles, and folks did their best to start over. In 2800, things began to change. Perhaps it was the age of their leader, as Alexander Kerensky was by this time 100 years old and straining even the life expectancy afforded by the very best in advanced Starleague medical knowledge. He not.
Oh, Jesus Christ! Holy camole! Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, they do have some pretty advanced tech, and generally, the better your medical, then the longer the life expectancy of people. But yeah, my guy needs some rest. He needs to retire. Somebody's gonna have to take up the mantle, and I think this is where it all goes to shit.
Had by any standards an easy life, and with many long decades of stress, pain, and loss wearing down on him, he was struggling to hold a dream together with zero room for error. He was weighed down by his most recent and perhaps deepest sorrow, as just 4 years earlier his wife Katyusha had contracted a virus, grown ill, and died. This, when coupled
Damn.
with his advanced age, meant he was unable to tend to Star League in exile with his former vigor. The depressed ancient general couldn't hold the reins of power with the strength he once did, and certainly didn't trust his sons to assume those responsibilities for him.
Yeah.
And so, slowly, things began to fall apart. At least that is one interpretation of events. I'm going to give you a different reason for what happened
really?
next. 2
Okay.
words. Capellan fuckery. Let me elaborate. I see the genesis of the problem as that once peace had taken root and people began to muster out of Star League, they had not only cast away their uniforms, but a military mindset without the discipline of a daily regimen, commands to be obeyed, and consequences for disobeying them. Order starts to break down, and a disorderly former SLDF soldier was probably at this point in time the most dangerous thing in the goddamn galaxy. There's
Very much
also
so,
another
yeah.
overlooked benefit of a uniform, as it is a reminder of which side you're on. When you're in uniform and following a cause, as the SLDF had up to this point, it didn't matter where you were from or what you thought, so much as what you were fighting for. In uniform, it's easier to overlook the shortcomings of your brothers and sisters in arms because they're part of the same mission as you.
Exactly. When all of you are striving towards the same goals, you can set aside your differences much easier in order to achieve that. But when you don't have that sort of organization anymore, then what do you do? And obviously, this is one of those things where it's hard to transition from military life back to civilian life, because for civilians, that's kind of just every day. But within the military, you definitely get used to that sort of level of organization. And when you get cast out of it and put into the real world, and things aren't quite as clear cut as they used to be anymore, then your brain starts to struggle and tries to find reason, coming to solutions that may or may not be the greatest.
You're looking out for them and they you. The situation may suck, but so long as you're in it together, everyone stands to benefit. It is further worth noting that by design, the SLDF was a multinational, multicultural fighting force for the benefit of the entire Star League, so that not a single house nor personal allegiance was allowed to interfere with the dedication of duty to the state above all. In the Star League uniform, you were fighting for the men and women at your side under the flag you carried, and nothing else really mattered. But with Amaris long dead, Star League long gone, and now with nothing to do but try to start a new life, people had to define, perhaps for the very first time, what mattered to them most. People being people, falling back on old ways was easiest, and soon old loyalties and a re-emergence of successor state ideologies began to take root. Before long, relative prosperity and expansionism itself began to drive a wedge between various factions, all eagerly attempting to exploit the same limited resources.
God damn it. And this is where it all happens, where the separation occurs. We're not working together anymore against a common enemy. We're now just going back to our old allegiances because, we're seeking for that level of organization once again. When we don't have enemies, we end up creating them, even if they were the brothers and sisters that we fought alongside before. History really does just repeat itself. Because history is directly tied to human nature, and human nature is a constant, so it sucks. It really does. I wish it wasn't the case, but this is kind of the reason why a utopia is impossible.
And there's something most of you should know by now. Never trust a Capellan, because their favorite sheath for any blade they have is your back. On a jungle world now named Eden, small-scale clashes, skirmishes, and disorderly riots broke out between colonists of the Federated Suns and the Capellan Confederation. People had by now fallen in line with ideologies carried from the inner sphere and banded together to fight those of opposing loyalties. People were initially content to riot and skirmish for a time as old enemies decided to finally hash things out. sadly mirroring events in the inner sphere unfolding simultaneously. It can be said that old hatreds die hard, while lawlessness was initially suppressed by those few SLDFs still in uniform, and what modest resources they still had available. They couldn't be everywhere at once. And so, in 2801, open rebellion had broken out. Rebel force.
Fuck, man, it's so sad. But this is just the problem, if not just the nature of militaries. Soldiers are trained to fight for whatever they call peace. But the moment that they obtain that goal, after through all that hardship and all that loss and all that war, they become useless. So what do they do? Where do they go? They're a loaded gun with nothing to shoot. The creation of this force was necessary in order to take back the inner sphere from Amaris. But by God, it really feels like all of this has been set in motion ever since the beginning, and this was the natural way of events. There was no other way this was going to turn out.
Nearly all of them, Capellan, decided to declare independence from Starleague in exile in May of that year. They were not merely content to say, "We quit, we're out, thanks for the ride and the colony and keeping us alive, General Kerensky." No. They were intent on making a new state from the ground up and curb-stomping anyone who got in their way. To further this strategic aim, they seized mothballed weapons and equipment from the tremendous arsenals they'd built years earlier to arm their new state and began fighting their neighbors, folks loyal to the Federated Suns, with everything at their disposal. Being that most of the population was quite familiar with how to effectively wage warfare, these rebels were not your weekend warriors playing games.
Oh yeah.
With the SLDF
They were
being
the
a
best
bare
of the
handful of
best.
soldiers at this point, peacekeeping efforts soon failed, and the situation rapidly spiraled out of control. Few thought that soldiers who had sacrificed so much would eagerly betray their fellows for territory, resources, and loot, but Capellans will ruin anything, as is their custom. Maybe it was the sirens blaring, or people losing their shit, or just that familiar sense of chaos needing desperate leadership, but the rebellion broke Alexander Kerensky's torpor, pushed back the fog, and brought him back to the front. Yes, 101-year-old General
Jesus.
Alexander Kerensky had had enough
Give this guy
of
a
this
break.
nonsense, and he acted to put an end to this. He dispatched his most loyal SLDF troops, led by his right hand from the Amaris Civil War, General Aaron D. Chevalier, and backed him up with Major Elizabeth Hazen of Blackwatch fame. The objective was to stop the rebellion from spreading, to preserve Starleague in exile, and, as necessary, destroy all opposition to good order. They were sent to put an end to this senseless violence and prevent further chaos from spreading in its wake. Eden was a dense, mostly untamed tropical jungle and filled with plenty of spaces to stage an ambush. Capellan forces had dug in deep and prepared the battlefield for the coming onslaught. When the loyalist SLDF forces made landfall, they
What is
found that
this?
the situation was worse than they
Is
were
this
led to
Nam
believe.
all over again?
Capellans had already done what they do best, which is lay traps and prepare to kill their former allies. As the SLDF forces approached the rebel encampments, Major Hazen's mech fell into a particularly devilish trap, a giant pit of oil that touched off the instant the mech fell in. That's not to say Major Hazen had grown soft, mind you, because Capellans have a PhD in backstab, betrayal, and traps like this. But with no way out and the mech rendered combat ineffective, Major Hazen ejected. Capellans being Capellans, they opened fire on the ejecting Mechwarrior with everything they had. Major Elizabeth Hazen, SLDF legend, Blackwatch hero, and survivor of the Amaris Civil War, took a heavy caliber slug to the neurohelmet,
Shit.
made ejection, and was out of the fight.
God
For a few
damn it.
minutes. Yes, the Blackwatch is
For a
that
few
hard
minutes.
to kill. Being shot in the head is a
Wait.
minor fucking inconvenience. When she awoke, head ringing and angry as all hell, she found General D. Chevalier heavily engaged in close combat with the rebels. I have not touched on the brave madness of General Aaron D. Chevalier, one of the most loyal men Kerensky could have ever have hoped for. This was a man, after all, who years earlier was willing to wage war on all of the great houses to restore Starleague. The short version of his career is thus. He was born in the Federated Sons, a survivor of the War of Davion Succession, an elite Academy grad, an SLDF hero, and a veteran of the 320th Dragoon Regiment, which was later tragically annihilated during the Hegemony campaign. He was a fierce competitor and in his youth had placed in the Martial Olympiad of 2736. He was a graduate of the Elite Gunslinger program, the same program that bred the Black Watch Elite Training Regiment. He led the heaviest fighting in the Third Hidden War. He'd hunted pirates. He made it to Lieutenant General before he even met Kerensky, and rose to Division Commander before the Americivil War even began. He was known as being a fearless, ceaseless motivator who tirelessly stood his post, worked as hard as he could, and never gave up. The man had a reputation for being fearless in the face of impossible odds, as he demonstrated by using the sharp pointy stick of the SLDF Navy to raid Amaris while Kerensky curb-stomped the periphery in Amaris' own Rimworld's Republic. He also knew what it meant to sacrifice for the greater good. Of his 5 children, 2 were killed by Stefan Amaris as they tried to find and protect members of House Cameron. His 2 oldest children died during Operation Chieftain, both having served as SLDF veterans and both having laid down their lives to try to take the hegemony back from Amaris. De Chevalier did not shirk from duty or responsibility, so when the general said,
"Yo, dude, that's fucking metal." But yeah, I just don't think any parent should have to experience the death of their child. But unfortunately, probably millions of people experienced that during the whole Americivil War.
"Make rebels go away," he waded in without second thought. So Major Hazen wakes up from a mild case of bullet to the neuro helmet to see an old Star League general with near 7 decades of military service stomping into the fray in his Atlas. Maybe it was past his bedtime, or maybe he was tired of this nonsense, or maybe he just wanted peace for once. But De Chevalier was thoroughly unamused.
I would be very frustrated if I were him.
And set himself to take care of this problem at point blank range.
Like, we had a good thing going, bro.
For him, that is what the Capellans had been waiting for. As he waded in, as some would say, to shield the ambushed SLDF units and buy time for a regroup, the rebels struck with full force. Using the full weight of their infantry, well-placed artillery, and sheer numbers, they overwhelmed the Atlas. De Chevalier didn't eject because to stop fighting and retreat would only endanger his men. He gave his last orders. He stayed at his controls and he went down swinging. They destroyed one leg, they disabled his mech, and he continued to fight like a madman. He was bellowing orders and firing every functional weapon he had, trying to hold back the jaws of defeat with every ounce of his soul. But no man is immortal. With wave after wave of Inferno missiles tearing into the Atlas, General De Chevalier died in a blaze of glory. And some would say that is the turning point. There was no way back now. A good man killed for no good reason. The uprising, the Americivil War, and now the Exodus had, up to this point, claimed plenty of folks under similar circumstances. During the Americivil War, entire worlds were glassed, put to the nuclear torch for no reason other than it denied Kerensky a staging point. Entire populations had been enslaved, starved, and gassed to prove Ameris wasn't going to go gently. Total war does that to a population. It relegates the act of killing to an industrial scale. And yet, with that war long over, and the trials...
That's fucked up. That's so fucked up. But yes, that's exactly what it does. I'm sorry, I haven't been speaking too much in these later portions. I've just kind of been really engrossed with Tex's narration here. I've likely said this several times in previous videos as well, but this really is just one of the strengths of BattleTech. I wouldn't really describe it as the negative side of war. I suppose I would say that it shows you a realistic side of war. Sure, there can be positives from it. There can be glory to be had and whatnot. But there are also consequences. And in many ways, it's morbidly beautiful, if that's even a way you can describe something. To see all of these consequences affect all of these people and then evolve into something that clashes against each other to then further change them or end them.
Past, with the hard times now behind them. Somehow, the worst of the Inner Sphere had been carried with them on the exodus to this new frontier and manifested again to wreak havoc. The once mighty men and women of the SLDF were now turning their guns on each other and fighting with the same ferocity
The main issue
they'd used on Amaris.
is that
What
you brought
happened next
humans.
is only rumored, as rebels didn't get a chance to really write much of a record of that event. And why that is, I'll get to presently. For with Hazen's fury unleashed, what had been a battle would now be remembered as a massacre. Major Elizabeth Hazen was thoroughly tired of this nonsense. She'd seen too many die. She'd seen too many fall in the line of duty, and this single death had stoked a flame deep in her heart, and this final act of betrayal was a catalyst for her rage. Sources say she emerged from the jungle in fury and grief and most assuredly about to kick some ass. Perhaps bagpipes played in her distant memory, perhaps with enough comrades lost along the way,
There they go.
the Black Watch officer had just finally snapped. What is known is she picked up a sword from a dead Capellan rebel and charged, and she just started cutting people apart.
God
Any
damn.
Capellan she saw died. Any who ran died tired. Any who begged for mercy found there was none to be had, at least not on this day.
Jesus
Her mad
Christ.
charge on foot with blood in her eyes and sword in her hand, with furious rage guiding it, proceeded to tear through Capellan lines. This insane act of defiance, a mad charge into overwhelming numbers to avenge the fallen, rallied the SLDF, because watching a Black Watch commander wading into a furious gun battle with just a sword, screaming bloody
Whoa.
vengeance was just the sort of thing to
Oh,
spark
yeah.
their spirit. So they joined her.
100%.
An absolute carnage followed. No rebels survived that battle, or the next one, or the one after that. Hazen didn't just turn the tide of a battle. She went on to annihilate every Capellan rebel she could find on the planet and vowed vengeance on any who dared to stand in her way. Eden's population fell that day, and that particular rebellion was made extinct. But the much diminished SLDF couldn't be everywhere at once. The news of General de Chevalier's death and the chaos which followed emboldened the rebel factions, and soon there were
Oh yeah, 100%. I forgot to think about that aspect as well. When such an important man dies, someone that many had feared or were following under simply because, they didn't want to cross him, now felt emboldened to do so. If they could do it, then maybe we can also gain our own territory. We can become independent and take all this for ourselves. Yeah, no matter how many rebels you kill, that idea has been created and will continue to exist. And as long as it does, then this whole venture is doomed. All we can do is struggle against it until our final moments, I guess. 'Cause yeah, we know how this ends.
was a full-on civil war. Faction after faction seized the moment and declared independence. It was absolute chaos as neighbor turned on neighbor, faction on faction, armed with the sheer volume of weaponry the Exodus fleet had carried from the Inner Sphere. Everyone had realized without a unifying SLDF, without a unifying cause, they were out for themselves, and joining one of the many emerging factions was the only way to stay alive. Star League in exile was now dead. A casualty of desperate people resorting to what they felt was their best option at that point in time. And, sadly, there was to be one more casualty.
Oh no. It truly is just the houses in the Inner Sphere all over again. The thing that we had looked at, the thing that we thought was super dumb, and so we all gathered here to exile ourselves, to find a new place so that we don't do that thing. And then we just did the same thing that we thought was dumb. The hypocrisy is palpable. And if only they could see themselves and what they were doing, maybe things would change. But introspection isn't really something you can force upon people, let alone a massive group of people like this who are also very desperate, and most definitely not in a good state of mind.
The death of his friend, his ally, his confidant, General de Chevalier, hit Alexander Kerensky hard. He was in the planning stages on striking back at the rebels, but sadly, on the 8th of June 2801, he died of a massive heart attack. The worst of the Inner Sphere had been carried with him on the Exodus, and then in a moment of strife, manifested among colonies they had founded, and there would be no going back to the brief peace they had achieved. SLDF veterans, at least those who'd not been forced to muster out, those who had only known and chose to maintain a soldier's life, were for the first time truly leaderless. The Star League in exile was now gone, reduced to a series of factions closely mirroring their Inner Sphere counterparts. Each faction vying for supremacy were now all too eager to wield the vast arsenals they had stockpiled, and through them began to forge new states for themselves. SLDF commanders in the field either fell in with the factions or died trying to put them down, in what would soon become the Exodus Civil War, in essence a microcosm of the First Succession War. The surviving SLDF leadership remained paralyzed. Each of the remaining generals tried to assert their own claims to Kerensky's legacy, or began siding with one faction or another. But
no, it's like, it's an unstoppable tide now. At this point, you're just trying to survive. Everybody with noble ambitions to follow Kerensky's vision just gets gunned down in front of your eyes. What are you gonna do? Obviously, your brain is going to choose the way of survival. You're gonna have to fight against your own human nature to deny that. But is that even for the best? Don't you also have people that you care about, things that you want to see, goals that are still there to be met, that can be possible if you just pick a side? I don't blame any of them. It is their faults, and they do need to accept responsibility for these actions, but man, it's so hard. It's so hard to be mad at them. More so what I feel right now is just sad. I feel sad that this is what has become of them after all that they sacrificed. Honestly, a little bit disappointed too, but it was kind of expected.
Nicholas Kerensky had his own ambitions. Perhaps it was a result of having lived in his father's shadow all of these years.
Daddy's dead now.
Perhaps it was watching his father's noble dream die before him. Perhaps it was the cycles of grief and loss he'd seen in the course of his life. His father, his mother, Star League in exile. All were gone now. But there's another consideration for what he did next. I feel his previous illness had something to do with it. Nicholas had caught the same brain fever his mother had, a disease that wreaked havoc on the early colonization efforts and known to cause extensive brain damage in its victims. He'd fought it for 2 weeks on the verge of death, and yet he'd survived. And I feel that changed him. In the wake of his father's death, Nicholas Kerensky claimed leadership of the SLDF. He didn't see himself as a son of a great man any longer. He saw himself as the heir of a noble ideology, a legacy that could in time save them all. The SLDF and all it represented would be his. He would keep the dream alive. It wasn't the craziest thing to claim. After all, that's Inner Sphere's standard operations.
I mean,
New boss inherits the job of the old boss. And Nicholas Kerensky saw himself now as a great man. That now was his time. His destiny was laid before him. Most of the division commanders decided to take their chances anywhere else. Most of them had no interest in following the unproven son of Alexander Kerensky in any capacity. Those who didn't laugh in his face politely walked away from his notions of grandeur. You have to try to understand the reasoning.
You need to prove yourself.
Nicholas Kerensky had not fought as they had in the American Civil War. He knew nothing of command, of war outside of history books. He was merely the son of the great General Alexander Kerensky. The great general was now dead. From their perspective, his noble dream of a Star League in exile had died with him. Many of the veteran commanders of the American Civil War were dead or ancient or fully intent on carving what territory they could as warlords and wrecking their neighbors in the process. With as many weapons, warships, and supplies as they had, there was now no course but war. So why not fight it out? They saw their best option as to throw in with an existing faction and do their best to survive. It was the Inner Sphere way, after all. Joining the son, the presumed heir of a great leader, and trusting his ability to restore order was a leap of faith that few were willing to take at this point. After all, the last leap of faith they'd taken resulted in what promised to be a gruesome conflict and all the ruin that it entailed. That's not to say General Kerensky's sons were alone. Despite everything up to this point and the hopelessness of the situation, some still believed, fanatically.
Really?
So Nicholas Kerensky gathered those most loyal to him, or if not him, his father's cause, which he had now assumed as his own. He told them that the Pentagon worlds were now doomed and that they must commit to a second exodus, to leave all of the factions behind, to leave the poison of the inner sphere's politics behind and start a new society. I ask myself, what kind of people would be willing to walk away from that, to take one last jump, to follow the son of a great leader in pursuit of an ideology not quite clearly defined? Well, people who are dreamers, for one. Nicholas Kerensky may not have been the ideal man for the job at hand, but perhaps the only man remaining with any semblance of a vision. Enough of them did see him as the inheritor of his father's dream.
Okay, that's fair enough. Like, if literally nobody has any plans and we're just fighting, and then one guy comes up with a plan that sounds plausible, then yeah, you would probably be desperate enough to cling on to that small bit of hope. Hope can do so much for people, but it can also be used to control them.
Nicholas, in turn, went to every Pentagon world and made his objective known. He wanted to escape the violence of what was now being called the Exodus Civil War, and to carry the true legacy of Starleague onward. He wanted to leave the cycles of tragedy and violence the Inner Sphere had always known. From the Pentagon cluster, a bare few thousand volunteers joined him, and with what resources they could take, they jumped. They landed on a recently colonized world in the nearby Kerensky cluster. In Russian, it means dream country. To his credit, Nicholas Kerensky later came back to save as many as he could. It was January 2802, Major General Nicholas Kerensky, yes, he'd given himself that accolade, Major General, began using the assembled remnants of the SLDF Navy and carefully organized a exfiltration from the Pentagon Civil War of over a quarter of the surviving civilian population to this new world, adding to his meager resources nearly 1 million farmers, merchants, and workers. Further, his forces were bolstered by the majority of the Navy having opted to side with him rather than duke it out with capital-scale weapons over what amounted to a handful of planets and the so-called leaders who were now fighting for dominion over them.
Makes sense.
However, of the mech jocks, aerospace pilots, infantry, and tankers of the SLDF Exodus forces, only the 146th and 149th divisions fully sided with him in his dream. From his new vantage point, Nicholas saw the cycles of history were inescapable. Humanity in its current state would endure only occasional peace before solving things the old way. Good old-fashioned warfare vis-a-vis grade A war crimes. He realized that the SLDF had left the Inner Sphere only to burn new worlds in the name of whatever cause they could drum up. He saw old ways of thinking, Inner Sphere ways of thinking, to be toxic.
Okay, and so we're just gonna go all the way to the other extreme of that spectrum, I presume. If I had to guess what's about to happen here, I think of it as something similar to, well, if any of you guys have read the Berserk manga, like the utopian city that Griffith created, there's a much darker side to it with all the demons kind of like fighting each other within the arena and violence and blood kind of being spilled in a controlled manner, let's say. And I kind of compare that to what I presume will be like the beginning of what the clans do and the honorable duels that they do and the more warlike culture that they have with each other. In a way, a controlled war to make sure that we do have an enemy to fight, but we don't wipe each other out. Such a strange balance of war and peace where people are happy to be there. I don't know. Looking at it from the outside, you can see some of the bullshit, but if you're one of those people, then maybe that's acceptable because it's better than nothing, you know? It's all we've got. This is just how we are as humans.
A direct contributor to what was now unfolding. knew that in time, this second exodus could very well do the same unless drastic action was taken. This new world had every potential to become a messy battleground in time, unless he were to change everything. He saw that changes were absolutely necessary to prevent a future world from burning what he intended to make. Drastic changes, and not just what a society stood for, but the very fabric of society itself. What if he were to change the balance of a society, its aim, governance, and focus? The old ways to him were flawed as they gave into biases, beliefs, and allegiances,
I miss my dog.
inevitably resulted in mutual annihilation, and he saw himself as a great man, the father of a new nation, guided by righteous ideologies.
Yes, what I deem to be righteous. Completely create a new culture surrounded by my ideals, based on my ideals. This group of isolated and desperate people, I will reshape them into the form that I want them to be in. I will play God. Is really what it's starting to sound like, what this narration is leading up to, supposedly. And hence, like, a lot of the reshaping of history that Tex mentioned earlier by Kerensky here. Well, Nicholas, I shouldn't call him Kerensky, he doesn't deserve the name. But it just feels like such a natural conclusion to come to in his situation with the kind of way that he thinks.
Given to him by his father, he was precisely the individual to forge a new civilization to correct the flaws of the old. And so, in the name of his father's legacy and in his own avowed belief in the nobility of Star League as an ideology, he reshaped the world from the top down. He saw himself as prime architect of this new world, and this would be a new society free of cultural bias, of prejudice, of backward belief systems, and any allegiance to the old ways, or as he saw them, backward thinking. Nicholas envisaged a new society founded principally on meritocracy, not the inherited power dynasties of the inner sphere, but it would be a divisive society by the warrior elite, the best, the bravest, and brightest that they had. Being a bit of a madman, perhaps as a result of his earlier mental trauma, serious illness, or just zealous belief in his own wisdom, he borrowed ideas from history that fit his vision for a utopian society. Upon close...
Oh my god. I just realized. Isn't this just Caesar from Fallout New Vegas? Or Caesar if you're not part of the Legion? This really is. Now I think about it, yeah. But in a different circumstance, and yet we end up with the same sort of conclusion. Which, by the way, if you haven't played Fallout New Vegas, please go and do so. It is phenomenal. Even if you're not really a fan of the like post-apocalyptic setting, like I am, I still greatly enjoyed the game systems and writing. And I think there are very few open-world RPGs that can match what Fallout New Vegas was able to achieve.
Examinations, it would be clear that he'd taken policies and governance designs from various powerful factions of ancient Terran history, from the Mongol hordes to honor-bound shogunate-era Japan, and even the strict totalitarianism of the 20th century Chinese state. Using these ideas, he created a template for a brave new world, one which would hopefully allow for the old ways of the inner sphere to be finally buried. He'd split his chosen people into 20 organized units, which he soon called clans. For each of them, he would choose a totem he felt represented a facet of their identity. They went along with this as, after all they had lost, they were united in one thing principally at this point: faith. And wearing the mantle of his father's legacy, he would shape that faith into what followed. At the heart of each clan was a reinforced Mechwarrior battalion of 40 warriors. Of the thousands and thousands of troops who had joined his exodus, he rigorously tested each warrior on their abilities to allow only the very best to continue to bear arms. This was to be a meritocracy after all, and a warrior society to boot, for in his eyes none were nobler than a warrior bearing arms to defend the society they led. he felt the army structure of the SLDF was deeply tainted and did away with lances, with standard military organization and hierarchies. He dreamed up a new way to fight, a new way to wage war, far from the perceived barbarism of Inner Sphere practices. The new clan organization was fairly simple, using schoolyard rules of arithmetic. 5 Mechwarriors made a star, 2 stars a binary, 4 binaries a cluster, several clusters to a galaxy. Rank structures were similarly reformed. There was to be, in theory, at least no more militaristic glorification of the individual, no grand reward for being an exceptional individual, save for being tested again and again in order to attain a higher level of responsibility, and tests further to ensure you were worthy of keeping that position. Only the very best would do for his ruling elite, regardless of their life up to that point. Only the ability to excel on the field of combat was important for what would become a warrior caste. Yes, Nicholas Kerensky was intent on saving the society of the Inner Sphere by imposing a caste system. The warrior caste would be a ruling elite made of the sharpest minds, the strongest bodies, and the most exceptional talents in the conduct of war.
Okay. I'm not gonna lie. If I had to choose a clan to be a part of, whichever clans the muscle mommies are a part of, I'll join them.
Set against each other in continual trials, to allow only the strongest to endure, would form a society of seemingly peerless combatants. I will say that admirably enough, Nicholas Kerensky submitted to these rigorous trials himself and excelled enough that by June of 2815, he had declared himself Ilkhan, supreme leader of the clans. At least, that's what their history says. A history I must note again, that he had a hand in writing. Now, with 20 clans of 40 warriors each, initially that covers 800 individuals. They were, as the ancient Terran saying goes, the cream of the crop. This warrior class was the end result of generations of horrific warfare, and they were as hardened as humanity could provide. And while a ruling warrior elite was established, the question arose, what about the rest? There were a million civilians wondering what the hell they'd just gotten themselves into, fleeing from devastation and thankful to at least be alive. They were willing to put up with some changes, but Nicholas Kerensky had plans for them as well. Other castes would soon follow, but he had more pressing issues at the moment. Survival chief among them. So by 2821, 19 years and change after the second Exodus, and 4 short years after establishing himself as supreme ruler of this new warrior society, he decided that it was finally time to fix the issue of the worlds he'd fled. The Pentagon worlds would be the first major trial for his new society. To gain resources, to save face his father's legacy, and prove the legitimacy of not only his leadership, but of the society he'd engineered, he wanted to take back the Pentagon worlds, reclaim the entire forces of the Exodus, and impose this new society upon them.
Interestingly, because of how the warrior caste system works, I feel like this is gonna be pretty easy. Like, relatively easy, especially compared to what Kerensky had to do in the American Civil War. Nicholas should, with these sort of troops, be able to at least get the job done. And dare I say, like, this was kind of a smart move from him. When all the people that you have only know of war, and then you create a society based around war and combat, and warriors gaining merits, then yeah, that's something that they can rally behind. It's not something that they have to readapt to. It's just life for them. Now, even in Fallen New Vegas, I did not agree with anything that the Legion did, really. There were some times where they had points to be made, but ultimately that way of governance is just not really something I can agree to. But if it works, it works. And in these desperate times, these people are going to take whatever they can.
This plan became known as Operation Klondike, and it was a terrifying success. Namely because the extensive preparation, intelligence gathering, and endless battle drill of Nicholas Kerensky's forces. The fighting forces of these new clans had drilled, fought, and competed against each other endlessly in war games that were at times bloody contests between combatants over who was the ultimate warrior that day. For years, endlessly, they had drilled, testing themselves against each other in every possible manner. With every trial undertaken, they were preparing for a full test of their abilities on the fields of battle to come. As Nicholas Kerensky's forces exhaustively prepared themselves for conquest, the Pentagon worlds had waged war among themselves over what dwindling resources remained in the name of whatever heathen cause they could dream up. The Exodus civil war continued in a brutal fashion, unchecked or unchallenged. In the wake of the second Exodus, the survivors of the Pentagon worlds had battled each other without major pause for 20 years. After ferocious conflict, they had generally mismanaged their own situation to the point they were about to collapse. They'd fought each other with the same relentless ferocity currently unfolding in the inner sphere, acting in many ways to mirror the first succession war in all but scale. Every weapon at their disposal was being used to the fullest of its capabilities. The veterans of the SLDF had fallen into old habits, and using the skills they developed during the American Civil War, they'd nearly burned each other to cinders to fight for marginally habitable space. Kerensky had up-to-date intelligence on the exact condition of each Pentagon world from refugees and from traders now plying the space lanes, and his own vast naval forces reactivated for the invasion itself. 5 separate fleets were sent out, one for each Pentagon world. They would observe and report the situation in detail. Reconnaissance was conducted in phases, and from listening posts clandestinely placed in system, all colony activity was recorded in detail and broadcast back to Ilkhan Nicholas Kerensky. The clanners plotted the location of all colonial vessels, all spacecraft both active and derelict. All communications and their content was thoroughly analyzed to get a better read on the situation. Slowly, through passive signals intelligence and direct observation, fleets got an exact picture of what was happening.
God, information is so important. And especially when you emphasize the fact that they had been fighting amongst each other for the past 20 years, slowly dwindling each other's forces and kind of not really expecting an outside force to come back in and swoop in and just take everything, then yeah, no, this is like taking candy from a baby.
And most importantly, where to strike. Battle planning was exceptionally thorough. Each of the 5 Pentagon worlds would have 4 clans assigned to invade and hold them. The invasion itself was the first clan blitzkrieg, and in essence a true test of Nicholas Kerensky's new society. This operation would showcase what they had learned, as well as the leadership, vision, and wisdom of Nicholas Kerensky. They had cast off the old ways, choosing to devote themselves to the legacy of Kerensky and the dream of a better world. But would it help them here and now? It is worth noting that at this point the survivors of the Exodus Civil War piloted barely functional equipment. And while the scale of the Exodus Civil War may have been small, considering
they're
it
out
was
of
a small
resources
population to start with, it is worth weighing that with the sheer amount of combat experience common throughout the population contained within the Exodus, coupled with the disproportionately immense amount of firepower at their disposal, the casualty numbers were accordingly horrific. The Exodus Civil War had destroyed roughly half the population and reduced the former colonies to total ruin. That's not to say Nicholas Kerensky's conquest of these worlds went without significant effort or casualties. The stakes were high, his numbers were limited, but this was an ultimate test of an ideology, and if they failed, their belief system would be proven insufficient. And no doubt the survivors of that would, in fashion, turn on each other. If they succeeded, however, they would forge a stronger society than they had ever enjoyed since leaving the inner sphere. The outcome of this invasion would also shape clanner history in other ways. As stated, it would demonstrate that the new way of organization and thinking trumped the old ways, which had, as demonstrated, significantly weakened their enemies. Secondly, the clans who did well in proving themselves through the invasion would be in positions of significant strength to bargain for additional territories, new worlds in the Kerensky cluster, or additional resources from what they captured. But those...
Man, I'm jumping ahead in the timeline quite a fair bit here, but this is also making me understand exactly how they lost at Tukiyad, because these tactics work so effectively here, and it's so natural for them to evolve into this sort of society. For their sake, for their survival. But the unified front and actual strategy and coordination, that kind of trumps the whole reward system for the clans and kind of going into battle without telling each other anything because they want to be the ones to claim that merit, you know? And this is what I mentioned earlier, that it's so fascinating seeing the consequences of all these events kind of culminate and evolve these people into what they become now and their culture and the way that they fight, the things that they believe in, and how that clashes with all the other things out there in the universe. It's so good, man. It's so good.
Clans who'd suffered during the invasion or failed to completely accomplish their objectives would be left weakened, and weakness was not something the New World would allow. While the invasion and liberation of the Pentagon worlds was overwhelmingly a tactical success and a further masterstroke of planning and preparation, it was during this time that the clans would suffer a significant loss. Andrei Kerensky died on the 1st of December 2821 in an ambush. Alone,
Damn.
He stood against a reinforced lance, and while he gave a good showing, he was slain by repeated deliberate shots to his cockpit. With his death, one of the few people who could have shaped the clans in any meaningful way, or at least served as counterbalance to the doings of his brother Nicholas, was now dead. Some would suggest that Nicholas arranged the ambush to be rid of his brother, so that he and he alone
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised, but even if it wasn't, I'm sure Nicholas was pretty happy with the outcome.
could steer the clans. The truth of that is some matter of dispute. It is of historical note, however, that one of the greatest lasting influences on clanner society would be a matter of linguistics. To this day, clanners say af instead of affirmative and neg instead of negative. This was a habit of Andrei's from his youth, something he'd passed on, and clanners still keep alive. Post-subjugation.
That is really cool. I definitely think it's all these little things that make a particular world, or should I say like universe, fictional universe, feel so much more expansive, like there's an actual history to it. Like, why do they say this specific thing? And then you can lead that into another reason, which then goes into this whole backstory, which then leads into this whole history from such a simple thing of neg and af, leading into the whole yes and, creating the whole universe of BattleTech. Now, of course, I'm not saying that BattleTech was created off of just that, because that would be really silly. But I'm saying that as a reader, if that's like the first thing that you get introduced to, it still kind of feeds into all the other things that come after it or came before it. It's a potential hook for your reader that leads them into the cycle of things that feed into each other, and ultimately drops them down the lore rabbit hole like it has for me. And yeah, I mean, I might be over-exaggerating that point and giving it a little too much glaze, but I just think it's really cool. I don't know how else to express it. Such a simple concept, but so effective, at least in my opinion.
Civilians that were liberated by these elite warriors were at first thankful for the fighting to be over. They were impressed by the leadership and display of firepower, and they were further grateful that the clanners hunted down the most savage and cruel warlords of the Exodus Civil War and brought them to swift, if brutal, justice. As a curious observation, it is worth noting that the people he liberated hailed Nicholas as his father, as he bore a striking physical resemblance to the great man. Then again, Nicholas had tried to emulate his father in many ways, not leastwise his appearance, as he piloted an Atlas II, where his father had originally led from the front in an Atlas in the early stages of the American Civil War.
We had recently learned about Superior Spider-Man. Well, we haven't really gotten into a video delving into it, but we did get into the beginning of it. And this is kind of reminding me of that sort of story thread, where you take out the mantle of somebody far greater than you and say, yeah, I'll be the superior version of you in every way possible, at least in their own minds. I don't like the things that Nicholas has done as a character, but I do really enjoy the path that he's currently on and what that will mean for the story going forward.
But it is no great surprise that people mistook him for his father. It had been near 20 years of horrific genocidal conflict that had muddied people's perception of history. All they knew was Kerensky was central to all of this. A Kerensky had led them out here, now a Kerensky was saving them. In light of their liberation and being saved from ruin, they saw Nicholas as the fabled savior Kerensky. And rather than correct these people's misconceptions,
Of course.
he chose to say nothing. Perhaps this fed his ego, or he truly saw himself as an inheritor of his father's greatness, ideology, and power, passing out food and supplies, bringing law and order, and mostly a new way of life, away from what these people had suffered. He slowly managed, in effect, to become the salvation these people so desperately needed. What follows next feeds into that, I believe. Unlike many conquerors throughout history, Nicholas Kerensky had planned for this moment. One of his first acts was to admonish the people, giving them his father's General Order 137 again. Some of them had forgotten about that in the intervening years of warfare. As education took a back seat to the needs of basic survival, he offered them the words of his father as more than a historical article of importance, though, but more as an article of faith. Nicholas Kerensky didn't just read his father's general order, he applied it to their current situation as one might a parable or guiding piece of philosophy. He preached to the people, interpreting his father's general order as a prophet might signs from heaven. He told them to grow and mature and to act in every way to eliminate the greed within them that had driven them to this path of destruction. He gave the people his father's words as gospel and offered through them a path to salvation.
It's just a perfect group of people to do that for. Giving them faith, something to believe in. In many ways, also setting himself up to be the person that they should listen to, because he is the one who speaks the word of God. I know delving into that sort of topic can get pretty controversial, but I think most of us can agree that religion is a very powerful tool that can be used to control people. Whether it be for good or for bad, it depends.
He offered them a road of honor, a belief system, a path that could transcend the misery they had inherited if they tried hard enough. He promised them a future they could take ownership of, and that, one day, when all was well, as his father had dreamed, they could return to the inner sphere and restore the peace of Starleague
Hope.
Once and for all.
Faith,
And that was
belief,
something they could believe. After everything they had endured and all of their suffering,
common
was
goal.
what they felt was the wisest course of action. This unifying gospel of Kerensky, this renewed belief in their purpose and a new way of life would give meaning to them. And why not? After all, Kerensky was their savior at this point. But first they had to tear away the last vestiges of the old world, the old ways. Any remnants of the corrupting, destructive inner sphere ideologies had to be left behind if they were to move forward. By Nicholas's interpretation of his father's wisdom, inherited from father to son, they quickly destroyed all that remained of the old world and any meaningful references to it. They filled their minds with devotion to personal and by extension clan
erasing
growth.
of history.
Nicholas Kerensky took the concentrated remnants of the Exodus Civil War and scattered them among the Pentagon worlds so as to never again allow people to congregate along political or cultural lines. And the people obeyed. They were traumatized by the American Civil War, the Exodus Civil War, and were by now tired of suffering. People's resistance had been completely beat down to a point that they were willing and ready to accept anything that promised a potentially happier tomorrow. Kerensky began shaping his new society as their leader and prophet of his father's wisdom, and communicated his directive often as much through extensive writings and directives. His process was to take the written and recorded words of wisdom from his father and draw from them unique interpretations which would then be applied to this new civilization. For example, General Alexander Kerensky's SLDF Primer 12 Principles of Command is more or less the foundational blueprint for the clan's internal bidding process for combat war trials and testing. General Order 137, as interpreted by Nicholas Kerensky, is the basis for the clan justice system. His shaping of society didn't stop there. Over time, he became not only a preacher for his father's vision,
Jade Falcon,
but a prophet of its wisdom. From the writings, orders, wishes, and publications of General Alexander Kerensky, his son Nicholas wove the tapestry of a new society. The change.
Fuck, dude. Karinsky basically laid up the ball, but then Nicholas came over here and slam dunked it in. The ball was gonna go in anyways, but the person who did it kind of changed, and the idea and the way that it went in was twisted from what it originally was supposed to be. And it infuriates me that this noble ideal became the way that it is, but I also understand why it became the way that it is, with all the different kinds of people involved and the situation that they were in order to survive and figure out that, you know, this way of thinking, this way of existing, it works for us. We're able to survive. We're able to, not really overcome our human nature, but find some sort of understanding with each other through these means. And I think at the end of the day, that's all that they really want, to just be alive, you know? I can't blame any of them for that. I can't, but I can. I don't know how to feel. I feel so mixed about it. Regardless, I'm just enjoying the story, and thank goodness it's fictional. There's plenty of things like this that happen in real life, and I don't want to be a part of that, but observing it is interesting. Although, if you try to look at it from a much broader perspective, I think all of us are a part of this sort of way of thinking to a certain extent. We just don't realize it.
Changes to this new world would become increasingly radical as the last vestiges of the inner sphere were swept away into the dustbin of history. And where precisely those choices would invariably lead is something we'll have to get to next time on part 2 of this lecture series. So for now, class is dismissed, and we will close the book on the clans for now and pick up next time, next lecture. Remember that this will be on the test, and for the love of God, stay away from the clown on the station. He's not ha-ha funny. He's more a Pagliacci on bath salts.
I see.
Your puny cadets are no match for elemental clan warriors.
司令官、私たちは侵入者に対してあらゆる予防策を講じてきました。半径25マイル以内で私たちに正当な敬意を払わなかった者たちは、その家族や
They do have really cool
全て
mechs
始
though.
末しました。警備員は境界線上で待機し、戦争計画を妨害しようとする暗殺者、スパイ、または愚か者を破壊する準備ができる。
この音楽は
Oh no! How did they show up here? Of course they did.
Macht euch bereit, diesem gottlosen Haufen Kretanern zu zeigen, wie Kriegsverbrechen wirklich aussehen. Klärt ein neues Grab für sie auf. Sie fliehen. Es wird ihnen aber nicht im Mindesten helfen. Sie werden nur sehr erschöpft sterben.
Tonight on WBPL 76.
Such a hard line to say, though.
WBPL 76
I mean, a cold
presents Community Service Theatre. Duncan Fisher in William Shakespeare's Macbeth. That's right. Thanks to the court settlement, we have Duncan Fisher as Macbeth. And I do mean that literally. He's every
Cool.
role. Yes. Hello, everybody. This is Duncan Fisher. I'm doing Macbeth. Sure. Let's pick it up where I left off. Methought I heard a voice cry, "Sleep no more! Macbeth does murder sleep. The innocent sleep. Sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care. The death of each day's life, sore labor's bath, balm of hurt minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast." Speaking of, if you want a feast in life, you ought to order Mech Pale. Fits into any mech cockpit, then holds as much food as you can eat. And boy, is there a lot of it. It's just chock full of vitamins and things. Now with less chalk. Mech Pale, from the makers of Bag of Glass and Box of
Glass.
Yeah, fucking sweet. I ace that shit. Reminds me of this one time where I was in the Valhalla Club getting totally tanked, and this guy came in and he
That's
just...
not the end of the play. You can't go off script.
Huh?
This is only Act 2.
Act 2? Jesus Christ, how long is this piece of shit? It's a tale told by an idiot. Wait. Don't I get to stab anybody else? This thing's boring as hell. All the cool shit happens off screen. Who wrote this anyway?
William Shakespeare, Jesus Christ, just stick to the script.
I cast Fireball.
Oh God, why is this happening?
That's hilarious. Oh my god, what a pause screen. Because Kiwi in our D&D campaign wants to find any chance to cast Fireball, even if it's going to hit the entire party and do basically nothing to the thing that we're fighting, but they must cast it. The D&D streams are kind of a trip.
Hey, Discount Dan here, and let me tell you about my new business. Discount Dan's Pretty Above Board House of Bargains. Why'd I call it Discount Dan's Pretty Above Board House of Bargains? Because if you call it Discount Dan's big old pile of rusted broken shit, nobody shows up. Nobody. Not even the people looking for the mountain of cocaine that surely doesn't exist under the pile. Or does it?
Definitely.
I don't know, but I'm passing the savings on to you. Let me tell you what I got in this pile. I got all sorts of things that I bulldozed out of the Steiner Arena. All sorts of things. Mech parts, mech seats, mech decals, mech rust, genuine mech rust. And it's all sold by the pound. By the pound. Can you imagine what you might find? This is genuine, grade D scrap that may or may not contain the barely conscious remains of Mechwarriors too stupid to eject. But don't take my word for it.
I found a needle with my foot. I need a doctor.
There's this guy dragging himself out of the pile. The Discount Dan just dragged him back and said, "Not so fast, bucko. I think he needs to go to the hospital."
I found this really cool boot, but there's a foot in it. There was a really cool piece of metal that said Clan Snake Cobra, and you know, Discount Dan helped me put it in my truck. Then he drove away in my
What
truck,
a guy.
and I kinda want it back.
Look at those fine, satisfied customer testimonials that I didn't record without their knowledge. Good job, people, for saying words with your mouth holes. Speaking of mouth holes, boy do I have some greasy porn straight from Canopus.
Part 1 of this primer on the clans really did feel like this train wreck that I saw coming, like everybody saw coming. But there wasn't really a whole lot that we could do about it, and it was just playing at us in slow motion. I guess you could describe BattleTech as that, like, as a whole. It's really fascinating to see, but damn, I'm so glad I don't exist in this universe. But yeah, dudes, if you guys, for whatever reason, haven't already, please go and support Tex. Link is at the very top of the description like always. I realize I probably forgot to say that during the intro of this video. Regardless, that's gonna be it from me today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.